Traveling through deep space can be a dangerous task. A transport ship that's passing through an unknown sector suffered a catastrophic failure, which caused a devastating explosion. 3 survivors wake from their cryosleep and manage to escape through the evacuation pods before the ship's completely destroyed. Still not entirely sure of what happened, they crash land into the valley of a foreign Rimworld with only a few supplies. All they know is that they need to work together to find shelter, survive, and maybe even find a way off this planet and make it back home.
Hey guys, this is Eric with Pixel Rookie, and this is a remaster of my original Rimworld narrative series updated as a movie for a much better viewing experience. This story follows the traditional crash-landed scenario start and is played with Randy Random as the storyteller on the second to hardest difficulty and is played on commitment mode. That's right, everything that happens in this story is from events that cannot be altered. The other rules to starting this playthrough is that I can't change the first random landing site I select, which is a temperate forest fortunately, and I can't make any changes to the first 3 colonists assigned to me, except for their names. The first colonist is named Hot Dog, as is tradition. The biggest issue with Hot Dog is that he's incapable of violence. Next we have Tao. Tao lacks in the combat department, but makes up for it with other high skills. Finally, we have Swarmlord, who isn't a great fighter either, but he's the most capable of the group. Overall, the group's skills as a whole aren't too bad. And now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this Rimworld narrative movie, The Adventure in the Valley.
After a terrible accident with their spacecraft, Hot Dog, Tao, and Swarmlord crash-landed into a foreign planet. Fortunately, they're all intact and managed to grab supplies for their emergency landing. After quickly surveying the surrounding area, it looks like they landed in a valley between 2 mountains. They knew the best thing to do is find a location to set up a temporary shelter. Right by their landing zone, they found an abandoned structure that could be fixed up and they could sleep in it. Just south of the structure was a good area to set up some growing zones. After all, they had no idea just how long they'd be down here and if their ship's emergency help beacon even worked. They quickly established a dumping zone right below there and a temporary stockpile zone. The 3 survivors were ready to begin. Swarmlord was their top shooter, so he equipped the rifle and Tao grabbed the revolver. Since Hot Dog was incapable of violence, he didn't really need a weapon. Since Swarmlord was their strongest fighter, he also equipped the armor vest, pants, and helmet. The first day was a success as they had a place to sleep comfortably, but they knew they had long days ahead of them. With no means to escape unless they're rescued, they decided it would make sense to build a base in this area. Hot Dog worked on the beginning foundations of it, while Swarmlord and Tao worked on planting crops for food supplies. At the end of the second day, they had most of their base's foundation completed. After being there for a couple more days, they decided to name their faction and settlement. They decided to call themselves the Pixel Rookies 2.0, and they called their settlement New Raleigh 2.0. Hopefully this goes better than the first New Raleigh run. They knew that in order to maintain a colony, they'll need electricity and the means to store it, so they decided to research on how to construct batteries. On the 6th day, they had their first contact with another person. It was someone who lived with the wild animals of the area. The decision was made to capture her and try and recruit her to help with their settlement. Now that the foundation of the base is finished, the next couple steps is to get some power running into it. They built some wind turbines to power the base. They wanted to have a setup for cooking and storing food. They'll turn the cave beside the kitchen into a freezer for food. All that's left to do is run the power directly into the kitchen and build a freezer so food won't spoil. On the 14th of April, a heat wave hit New Raleigh 2.0. This can be dangerous, so they placed some coolers in each room to help with that. Before they could even finish building them though, their prisoner passed out because of the heat. Tao rescued her and set her back into the bed and tended to her. Unfortunately, she didn't make it. The following night, she passed away from a heat stroke. Everyone felt guilty that they brought her into this and she died because of it. The least they could do is give her a proper burial. Life was hard on this Rimworld. Tao finally finished the research on batteries so they could finally store excess energy that the turbines generated. The next step is researching geothermal power to produce a ton of power for their long-term plans. A battery storage area was built and power lines were run to it. On the 9th of August, a transport pod crashed right outside of New Raleigh 2.0. Hot Dog rescued him and placed him in captivity to heal him up and try to recruit them to join the colony. Now that they had proper storage of excess electricity, it was time to add some lights to the colony so it felt like a proper living space. Everything was moving along nicely. That was until a tribal man raided their base and started attacking immediately. The fight was quick though. Tao and Swarmlord worked together to quickly dispatch him. After days of attempts, they finally convinced their captive to become a member of their colony. We'll name him Hoff after another member of our Discord channel. Hoff didn't have any combat experience, but it was still good to have him armed with a spare handgun that they had in storage. Since they didn't have another room prepared yet, Hoff temporarily shared a room with Tao. Everyone agreed that there was no need for corpses to be laying around their base, so they dug another grave for the tribesman that attacked and laid him to rest. New Raleigh 2.0 was slowly growing, but progress was still looking good. In the middle of the night, they received a cry for help over their comms, begging for safety and an agreement to join their colony if they offered protection from their attackers. Everyone agreed they could definitely use an extra person in New Raleigh 2.0, so they offered safety and a new recruit joined the ranks. We'll name this colonist Wilfred Avatar, aka Fravatar. We're excited to have you with us. Now let's take care of these raiders. Fravatar has lots of points of melee, so he'll equip the knife. The raiders will be coming from the south, so our 3 fighters prepared for the invasion from the narrow south entrance. While they were setting up, the raiders began their assault. During the chaos of the firefight, Fravatar flanked them and took one of them out. This was enough to cause the other raider to flee for their life. Another successful defense. Another grave was prepared to be dug and a party was thrown to celebrate their victory and welcome Fravatar as the 5th member of New Raleigh 2.0. Spirits were high and things were looking good. Can the members of New Raleigh 2.0 continue to thrive, or will Randy Random throw something awful their way soon and be their demise? Spirits were high in New Raleigh 2.0 as they successfully defended Fravatar from his attackers. Hot Dog buried the fallen raider where the others were at. It was slowly turning into a little graveyard outside of the base. On the 31st day, a cold snap hit. This could be dangerous for 2 reasons. The first is that the cold could easily kill with hypothermia. They needed to prevent that from happening. They set up central heating in the now enclosed base to keep it warm inside. Ventilation needed to be installed in all the rooms so everyone stayed warm. Tao finally finished his research on geothermal power. He decided that he would begin researching how to build auto turrets next. The other reason the cold snap is so dangerous is because their crops couldn't survive the freezing temperatures. Their food supply was starting to dwindle. It turns out that one heater wasn't sufficient for keeping the entire base warm, so they had to build another one. Outside of the base, another transport pod crashed. Fravatar went out to rescue this person, hold them captive, to tend to their wounds, and try to recruit them. New Raleigh 2.0 was still growing and it would really help out if they successfully recruited this new captive. The decision was made to replace all the wooden walls with stone. A simple accident could easily burn down their entire base, and they knew that this was their new home for now. They had to make sure it was more formidable. A few days later, Tao successfully recruited the new colonists to the base. Since the spare room was not ready, a bed was set in Hot Dog's room temporarily. We'll name this new colonist, obviously from our Discord channel. With the increased size of the base, the 2 turbines were hardly providing sufficient energy to the base anymore. They needed to hurry and finish the construction of the geothermal power generators soon. Because they couldn't grow crops for food anymore, they had to hunt. While Swarmlord was out hunting, a muffalo nearby went mad and attacked him. Reinforcements came soon enough and they took it out. This would provide a lot of meat for them, but Swarmlord was pretty banged up from the fight. They were still having issues with the power and they needed more space to have a proper infirmary. The accommodations were being made while New Raleigh 2.0 continued to expand. On the night of the 6th of December, 2 pirate raiders were preparing to attack New Raleigh 2.0. They didn't want to risk getting anyone hurt, so they made defense preparations. That morning, the men prepared for attack. The firefight began. Swarmlord tried to close in for a better angle on the enemies, but it wasn't working. He and Fravatar fell back to go around for the flank. Fravatar got there quickly and engaged with the closest raider. He easily brought him down. The other raider tried to flee, but Fravatar was way too fast. He caught up with him and took him down quickly. The 2 of them were only wounded, so both of them were taken in as prisoners. Maybe they'd be able to convince them to join New Raleigh 2.0. Both prisoners had pretty extensive wounds and needed to be treated immediately. While tending to their wounds, one of the prisoners didn't make it, another casualty for trying to invade New Raleigh 2.0. Another grave was dug for them to be properly disposed of. With power surges still happening, Hot Dog was finally able to finish the geothermal power generator. This was a huge step of progress for their colony. The next big project that they needed to consider is better defenses for the base. They decided that walls needed to be set up to make one individual entrance into New Raleigh 2.0. On the 8th of December, another transport pod crashed nearby. Obviously, went out and captured him so they could nurse him back to good health and try to recruit him. Continued progress was being made and expansions were being built in the base. With everything else going on in the base, they didn't realize how critical their food situation was becoming. Their storage freezer was almost completely empty. Swarmlord went out to hunt some megasloths that were in the area for food. While hunting, one of the megasloths turned on him and started to retaliate. He started to flee and needed some backup. The group worked together to fight the megasloth, and they were finally able to take it down and bring their corpses back to the base to be butchered for their meat. During all this, and completely out of the blue, Hoff had a mental break, and without hesitation, he slaughtered Tal's pet dog, Pepe. Everyone was shocked by this outburst, but because of their dire food situation, they had to move past this. and used Pepe's meat to help them survive the remainder of winter. They finally had some more food supplies and meat stored up, so obviously began prepping meals for everyone again. They realized that their initial wall was built too close to their base. They could use some additional space, so they planned a new wall and started disassembling the old one. They also closed out their south entrance to make one entry point into the colony. From here, they made a funnel into their only entrance so any intruders would have no defenses if they decided to assault New Raleigh 2.0. On the 12th of December, things started to take a turn for the worse. Fravatar had a mental break and was wandering in the colony in a depression, and immediately following, Swarmlord, Hot Dog, obviously, and one of the prisoners got sick from the plague. This could be devastating to the colony. Out of nowhere, Swarmlord collapsed from his sickness and needed immediate medical attention. The plague was hitting him hard. Tao rescued him and immediately started tending to his sickness. They've done everything they can at this point. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. The worst happened with his sickness. Swarmlord died. Burying him with the others wouldn't do him justice. Swarmlord was one of the original 3 founders of New Raleigh 2.0. They decided that a crypt would be made and he would lie there for the rest of time. First, they needed to carve out the final resting place. During all this, Hot Dog collapsed while he was out. The plague might take him next. Tao didn't want to lose another colonist that day. He immediately rescued Hot Dog and laid him in the infirmary. Tao was trying to tend to his illness right away, but then something happened. Upon further inspection, it looked like Hot Dog was able to develop an immunity to the plague just in the nick of time. He was safe. For now, at least. That evening, the crypt was dug out and it was time to say goodbye to Swarmlord. His outfit was removed, and because Fravatar was the melee fighter, he was given the armor for protection. Fravatar built the sarcophagus, and Hoff took him into his final resting place and laid him to rest. It was a sad moment for the colonists of New Raleigh 2.0, but they had to continue moving forward from this if they wanted to survive. They just had some good luck come through and they were able to successfully recruit their captive. The only issue with the new member of the colony is that their food storage is still quite low. Hopefully that won't be a problem later on. We'll name our newly recruited member of New Raleigh 2.0 after Smonk. They had another stroke of good luck. A group of huskies found their way into the valley and were self-tamed. This could be helpful for training them to haul objects to storage, and maybe they could even breed them for dogs to sell to visiting colonies. Things were beginning to look up again. That was until another group of raiders were preparing to attack New Raleigh 2.0. This was the largest and most armed raiding group they've encountered yet. They needed to prepare themselves with some additional defenses, and they lined up into their positions. Their defensive funnel into the base wasn't fully completed yet, but it was better than nothing. The raiders began their attack and the firefight started. Fravatar needed to get rid of his knife for a ranged weapon. He fell back to grab an SMG and returned to the fighting. Smonk went into the fray to defend the gunman. He held the line as long as he could, and after helping take a few raiders out, he was taken down too. Fortunately, the raiders suffered enough casualties that they started to flee. Fravatar began to chase down the raiders that were trying to escape. Hot Dog went in to rescue Smonk. Fravatar caught up to the raiders and engaged with one of them. The others continued to flee, and Fravatar made quick work of him. Another successful defense. The body count was high, and more graves needed to be dug up to remove the corpses. Shortly after the fighting ended, their prisoner went berserk because of starvation. It looks like he was neglected because of the chaos that's been happening. He broke out of his cell, so Tao and Fravatar went to restrain him. After a quick brawl, the prisoner was incapacitated again, so Tao put him back into his cell. That night, an important research was completed, and they were able to construct gun turrets for their defenses. 4 turrets were placed at the entrance of the base where the funnel was being constructed. This will really help fend off future raids. After surviving and growing New Raleigh 2.0 for an entire year, a toxic fallout hit the valley. This can be dangerous to the colonists if they're exposed to it for long term and they have no idea how long this fallout would last. This could get ugly. To combat this, they constructed a roof over the main entrance and restricted the colonists from leaving the base. They decided to put this time to good use and started expanding their base into the mountain until they were raided again. It was a small group, but they didn't want to take any chances. They lined up and the fighting began. The team easily dispatched one of the raiders and incapacitated the other. The final raider fled. Hoff put the new prisoner in their cell to try and recruit them into the colony. They were critically wounded, so Tao woke up and tended to them right away. Without even realizing it, they were almost completely out of food and the toxic fallout was still going on. This is not a good situation to be in. They'd run out of food before they would finish growing any more crops, so they had to quickly go out and hunt. Hoff would go out initially and bring some wild game back to the base. They could do this in shifts so nobody gets too much exposure from the toxic fallout. He brought in his kill, and it looked like another one died, so he collected it as well. They needed as much food as they can get right now. Fravatar decided to join him to speed this process up. They found the corpses of buffaloes outside, so they decided to collect them instead of killing more animals. Upon further inspection, most of these animal corpses were rotted from the toxicity. This means that all the animals had too much exposure to the fallout and aren't a viable food option. They received a message from a refugee being chased and seeking safety. Because of the dire food situation, they had to ignore the message and leave the refugee to fend for themselves. They couldn't afford another mouth to feed. There was some food ready to be harvested though, so they had to go back out in the toxicity to gather some food supplies. They quickly realized that they needed to release the prisoners to fend for themselves. They can hardly feed their own men, they couldn't waste precious food on unnecessary mouths. They opened up the allowed area to outside of the base in order to have other members help farm. If Hoff and Fravatar did all the work, they'd receive too much exposure of the toxicity. Looking over them, they only had initial and maybe minor buildups at most. This is okay so far. While checking on the health of the colonists, Tao had a mental break from the pain he was experiencing. He slowly approached one of the new huskies, Lilith, and killed her. Now normally, everyone would be more upset at what they just witnessed, but they were almost completely out of food and Tao did what might have been necessary anyways. Fravatar had the most exposure to the toxicity, and he wanted to avoid anything more than minor, so they established a new zone to keep him restricted to safe areas only. During the chaos of a fire from the thunderstorm, Tao slaughtered another one of their huskies, David. Tao finally seemed to snap out of his mental break at that point. After surveying the landscape, no wildlife was alive anywhere. Desperately trying to find more food, Smonk went out and was foraging all the berries that he could find to bring back into the base. On the 11th of April, the fallout finally passed only after 6 days. They were lucky it didn't last longer. That afternoon, wild deer started passing into the valley, which meant it was time to hunt. Not sparing any time, a hunting group of 4 men went out to kill the deer and stock up their food supplies. It took them all day to bring all the wild game to their freezer. A couple days later, they finished their defensive wall, leaving only one entrance into their base. This was a huge milestone for the longevity of New Raleigh 2.0. They also realized that it was time to increase their growing zones to make sure they have enough food to survive another event like the one they barely just got through. The first thing they needed to do was increase their growing zones to produce more crops. While laying out the growing areas, a transport pod crashed near their base. Hoff immediately recognized the survivor to be his father. Hoff rescued him and brought him into the base where he went to tend to his wounds. Sadly though, he was too hurt and didn't even survive the first night. A new grave was placed for his father to be laid to rest. A heat wave came through around the same time. This meant that they didn't need the heaters anymore, so they'll deconstruct those and use the materials to build some air conditioning units. They wanted to make sure their base is climate controlled for the hot summer. Later that day, Hoff broke down into a catatonic state and was rendered completely incapacitated. The brief moments of joy from reuniting with his father were crushed by his immediate passing away, and he was not able to handle the sadness from his loss. Hot Dog went ahead and buried his father in the cemetery outside. They're still working on removing all the wooden walls and replacing them with stone ones. The following night, they were attacked by a raid. This would be a good opportunity to test out their new defenses. The firefight began and obviously was taking some fire. He fell back for more cover and Tao moved closer to the fight. Right then, one of the turrets took too much damage and exploded, causing a chain reaction of all of them being destroyed. Fortunately, obviously was out of the way and didn't get hurt. He and Tao took out another raider, which caused the rest of them to flee. They chased after the remaining men. Knocking one of them unconscious, they proceeded to capture him as a prisoner. One of the other men escaped, so Fravatar and obviously knocked out the other raider and captured him as a prisoner too. Lee fell down from his injuries and needed to be rescued. They noticed that there was one more survivor from the raid at the entrance, so they captured them as well. Just a few hours later, one of the prisoners succumbed to their wounds. The cost of attacking New Raleigh 2.0 was high. The men worked on repairing their defenses for future raids. There were still improvements that could be made there. More graves were dug for the fallen men. Realizing that the other prisoners' fates were similar to the first, the decision was made to simply release them and let them find their own ways back home. They would show them mercy for now. Just then, a refugee reached out over the comms requesting aid. After considering if it was worth helping, they offered the refugee safety at their base. Sir came running into the valley and was immediately given a weapon. The raiders came next, so the men prepared for the attack. The defenses were not completely rebuilt, but they fought them nonetheless. All of them were equipped with melee weapons, and there were too many to fend off from afar. They closed in and began melee combat. Smonk hurried to the front entrance and helped fight off the tribesmen, and they began to flee. Fravatar and Smonk chased who they could down and rescued their fallen men. One of them tried to get up and escape. Smonk made quick work of them. Smonk frantically tried to tend to everyone he could. Their medbay was completely full. There were too many injuries and too few people to help, and that's when Tao died from too much blood loss. He died protecting their newest colonist, and Smonk wanted to make sure it wasn't in vain. He hurried and brought medicine to Sir and began treating him as well. During the raid, one of the released prisoners died, and the other one didn't even make it out of the front gate. But there were much more important things to worry about right now. Another tomb was being dug into their crypt for Tao to be laid to rest. That evening, Sir's wounds became infected with disease. On the 7th of August, Tal's sarcophagus was built and he was laid in his final resting place. Only one of the original 3 crash-landed survivors were left. A wildfire was started and it was spreading through the valley, killing off all the vegetation outside of the base. They needed to make sure it didn't get past their walls. That same night, Sir died from his infected wounds. At that moment, it felt like Tal's death was for nothing, but they had to continue pushing forward. More tombs were planned to be dug out. Even though Sir was only a member of New Raleigh 2.0 for a brief amount of time, he was still one of them. If that wasn't bad enough, a faulty wire in the kitchen exploded and caused a fire. Everyone got up quickly and took care of it. Around that same time, Hoff had another mental break from the loss of his father. He couldn't stop dwelling on his death and took his rage out on their last pet husky, Big Boy. He immediately came back to his senses though. Things continued to get bad as solar flares came through and disabled all their electronics. It passed soon enough though, and they were almost ready to bury Sir. Fravatar had his own mental break from all that happened in the past few days and became obsessed with corpses. It was his own morbid way of coping with all their losses. He went to the graveyard and dug up an old corpse. He proceeded to take it into the dining hall and leave it on the table. Hot Dog quickly cleaned up the area and placed the corpse back into its grave. The base felt emptier that night than it did in a long time. The following night, another transport pod crashed outside of New Raleigh 2.0's walls. Hot Dog quickly captured the survivor to tend to their wounds. At the same time, Smonk also had a mental break and went to the graveyard to dig up a rotting corpse, leaving it exactly where Fravatar placed the other one. During all of this, Hot Dog took Sir's body to be laid to rest. When Smonk came back to his senses, he cleaned up the mess he made and buried the corpse where he found it. Just a few hours later, a raider prepared to attack them and their captive got a disease from their infected wounds. The single raider came into attack and was immediately met with 2 shotgun blasts. It was clear that they weren't much of a threat. Hoff and Fravatar quickly moved in and dispatched them with ease. With so many raiders dying at their base, many more graves were dug up to get rid of the corpses. At this point, their crypt was starting to grow in size too. Their captive was in really rough shape and Hoff did what he could to treat the injuries. That evening, they died as well. Hoff just wasn't able to do enough to save them, so he took their body out to be buried. The base was slowly being built out more when another raid came through from the tribespeople. The fighting ended soon enough though. The men chased down the last raider, and as they dispatched him, a cargo pod filled with cloth and food landed nearby. After finishing research on microelectronics, they thought it was time to research something more recreational. They decided to look into brewing beer next to help ease the tension from all that's happened recently. The larger growing zones were already paying off as their freezer was almost completely full. It was time to expand the storage space in the freezer to hold more food. While finishing up the work in the freezer, another transport pod crashed nearby. The survivor had great shooting skills and very high intelligence. They'd be a great addition to the colony if they could tend to their wounds and recruit him. Later that day, Hoff had another mental break and went into a daze due to the loss of his father. Now that it was September, it was beginning to get cold again. It was time to rebuild the heating for the base and shut down the air conditioners. Hoff broke out of his daze and was so exhausted that he passed out in the middle of the hallway. He woke up and immediately got into a fight with Smonk. It ended quickly enough though, and they both got food to eat and talked it out, and then they both went into the medbay to rest up. Progress was slowly being made at New Raleigh 2.0, even though they suffered some more casualties. They were still pressing on. On the 6th of September, Smonk successfully recruited their captive. We'll name him after my brother's Discord username, Stompy. It's good to have another member join the colony. While a visiting colony is checking out their garden, a cougar goes mad and starts attacking whoever it sees. Hoff is right beside the cougar and is all alone. He decides it's smarter to flee from it and get help instead of taking it on alone. He's immediately mauled by it, but he makes a break for it anyways. He gets close to the main entrance but is hit again. Fortunately, Obviously and Smonk are coming to help. They line up and shoot it down while Hoff takes the cougar head on in melee combat. They finally down it and Hoff finishes it off. It seems fitting since he was the one that was hurt by it. Now that it's dead, never and safe, they take the corpse to be butchered for meat. Obviously is tending to Hoff's wounds. He got pretty banged up from the whole encounter, but it doesn't look like anything too critical. It's time to create a brewery in the colony. The brewing station and fermentation barrels are laid out so that they can begin their work on that soon. The next day, a group of raiders decide to attack the base. It's a decent-sized group of men, so they prepare their defenses. The raiders have longbows, and the range is further than the shotguns. This means that Smonk is the only one that can shoot at them from their defenses. One of the melee fighters closes in and is hit with all 3 shotgun blasts right away and killed immediately. The bowmen know it's too dangerous to get close, so they keep their distance and fire at the men. Obviously is hit by an arrow while they fall back. Smonk continues the firefight from the doorway and gets hit too. He decides to fall back and force the men to get closer if they want to continue the fight. They take some time to evaluate the situation and make the mistake of moving forward into the base. As soon as that happens, the men take their positions and open fire immediately. This takes out one of the raiders right away, and the other one decides to flee. Another grave is dug and they decide not to pursue the fleeing raider at this time. On the 11th of September, a refugee is being chased by a large group of raiders and asks for their help. It's decided that it's worth taking him in and fending off his attackers. Looking him over, the refugee has some great stats, especially in his combat and medical. Not long after, the raiders enter New Raleigh 2.0's territory and attack immediately. The men line up and brace themselves for the attack. They decide to hold off while evaluating New Raleigh's defenses. They quickly decide to engage and move forward. They're greeted by multiple shotgun blasts, which kills one of them right away. There are too many of them and they get past the sandbags and begin melee combat. The new colonist is ready with his club and tries to go into the fight. Obviously, falls back so he can continue to fire from the back line while everyone else is in melee combat. The fighting continues and another raider falls. Obviously, continues to fire from the back line, trying to kill off as many as he can. Another one falls and they begin to flee. Hoff gets incapacitated and Stompy goes down with him. The archer from the back left the other raiders while the rest were dealt with. They had to quickly rescue their men and tend to them. It also looked like one of the raiders weren't killed, so they took him into the prison and tried to recruit him. Most of the colonists were pretty banged up from the last raid and their prisoner was doing especially poor. It wasn't long until they died from their wounds. More graves were dug up. Their cemetery is becoming quite large at this point. The new recruit was tending to everyone's wounds, and upon inspecting each person, nobody was in too much danger right now. To boost morale while everyone was still recovering, Fravatar decided to throw a party. Hot Dog, Smonk, Fravatar, and obviously hung out in the dining hall and socialized for a couple of hours until a conduit had a short circuit and caused a small fire. The party was broken up and they quickly tended the flames as quickly as they could. Fortunately, no major damage was done. It's time to name our new survivor after my good friend Heath, who's been featured in some of my other videos. We'll name him after his nickname, King Size. The beer production was coming along slowly but surely. More fermentation barrels were added so they could build up a stockpile for either consumption or trading. Later that night, another raid came through and they were attacking immediately. Not realizing the raiders were invading, Fravatar was outside of the wall. He was attacked before he was able to get to safety, and even though he was injured, he made a break for it. Smonk and obviously began opening cover fire to try and help him out. Realizing that he wasn't going to quite make it across the sandbags, he turned to fight back. He was surrounded by 3 men, but one was taken out by a shotgun blast. While fighting off 2 men, Fravatar killed one of them and the other raider died from a shotgun blast. This was enough to make them flee. King Size showed up to help clean up the remaining men. He and Fravatar chased down the last man and incapacitated him. King Size captured him and decided to tend to his wounds. It's always good to have more men in the colony if possible. More graves were ready to be dug. Many have tried to take down New Raleigh 2.0's defenses and many have failed. Their medbay was almost completely full again and they were trying to heal up as soon as possible. That morning though, a group of man-hunting Arctic foxes were passing through the valley and they were targeting the base. Wounded or not, the men had to get into position to defend themselves. They all lined up and the plans for more turrets were built. Right then, the foxes stormed the entrance. They were taking many shots, but there were just too many and they broke the line. They began attacking the men. Hoff stayed in the back and picked them off where he could. King Size was overwhelmed and knocked down before the rest of them were killed off. The bodies were taken to the freezer for food and King Size was rescued. Most of them were still hurt from the previous raid and continued to rest up in the med bay. Stompy didn't realize how hurt he was and needed to be rescued inside the base. Hoff went to rescue and tend to him. Not even realizing it, obviously he died from too much blood loss. With the chaos of everyone being hurt, they didn't realize how severe his wounds were. This was a big blow to New Raleigh 2.0. They checked to make sure no one else was critically wounded and Fravatar was the only one that needed immediate attending. Another sarcophagus was laid out to be built for Obviously to join the other fallen colonists. Fravatar was taken care of, but King Size passed out at the front of the base and needed rescued again. It was the 2nd of December and a cold snap came through. Fortunately, they had enough food stored up this winter, so it shouldn't be an issue. Later that day, King Size had a mental break and was going on a sadistic rage on their prisoner. The colonists didn't realize it, but King Size had a strong addiction to psychite, and the withdrawal from not having any since joining the colony was hitting him hard. He entered the jail cell and injured the prisoner, but he immediately snapped out of it afterwards, so he rescued him right away. There were still issues with the defensive funnel into the base, so they decided to expand the opening to make invaders more vulnerable. On the 3rd of December, something absurd happened. Obviously's corpse was outside while his resting place was being prepared, and a wild boar ate his corpse. This was completely unexpected, and Hoff was infuriated by this. He waited until that night and went out to kill the boar that ate Obviously's corpse. It was the least they could do for him. It only took a few shots to kill it. Poor Lee just couldn't catch a break and be laid to rest with the others. Looking over King Size's health, he was slowly going through withdrawal of his psychic addiction. It would take some time to kick it, but they were willing to help him along the way. More space was being carved out in the base to continue the expansion of New Raleigh 2.0. That night, another refugee was being chased and seeking safety. They agreed to take him in for refuge. Looking over the newest recruit, he had some great shooting and mining skills. That will come in handy for sure. We'll name our new recruit after someone who commented on the first episode requesting to be a colonist in the series, Joey Tucker. Now let's take care of these raiders. There were a decent amount of men, but 2 of the turrets were rebuilt and there were more clearings in the wall for cover. Right away, one of the raiders ran in on their own, taking heavy fire. He was killed before his men could catch up to him though. The other melee fighters continued to trickle in and take heavy fire. Another one died. The third one made it to Hoff and got a few hits in before being taken out. Another raider was closing in closely behind him and engaged with Hoff. She was killed soon enough and this caused them to flee. One of the raiders were gunned down while running away. Fravatar quickly took care of the last wounded raider while the others escaped. They realized that their prisoner was too stubborn to recruit, so they released him to go back to his base. Joey Tucker escorted him to his freedom. While cleaning up the mess of the raid, Hoff collapsed and needed rescued. Smonk took care of him and brought him to the med bay. It got to the point where they needed a high-tech research bench to look into more advanced technologies for their base. A party was being thrown and King Size had a mental break around the same time. The drug withdrawal was still hitting him hard. He took the opportunity of the party to binge on alcohol to help cope. Everyone else gathered in the dining hall and enjoyed a few beers and had a great party. It was a great way to end the evening and celebrate Joey Tucker joining New Raleigh 2.0. It looked like King Size was only a quarter of the way done with kicking his psychic addiction. He still had a long ways to go. He got so drunk that he passed out on the floor of the storage room and needed rescued. Hot Dog woke up from bed to help him out. He went to him and carried him to the med bay to sleep it off and rest up. Another conduit blew and started fire in the kitchen and the food storage. This could be really bad if the fire spread to all the food. Everyone woke up and fought the fire until it was completely put out. It took a few men and a lot of effort, but they managed to control the fire and not lose any of their food supplies. The power surge caused their geothermal generator to blow, so Hot Dog worked to repair that immediately since it was the main source of their power. It took a couple of hours, but he had it back up and running in no time. That night, another raid attacked the base. Upon further inspection, Hot Dog and Smonk were out mining right where the raiders showed up. They immediately attacked them. Hot Dog and Smonk tried to escape. While running away, a bullet hit Smonk and wounded him enough that he couldn't run. He got hit again and the men closed in on him. Hot Dog, who's incapable of violence, looked back but realized there was nothing he could do and left him. One of the raiders was ahead of the rest of the group and he didn't see Hot Dog fleeing from behind. When he realized he was there, he opened fire but missed his shots. Poor Smonk was almost completely surrounded until he was incapacitated. The raiders decided to take their prisoner and leave without continuing their attack. They took Smonk and his fate was in their hands. Hot Dog continued making his way back to the base as the rest of the men left. The colonists left their defensive posts as Hot Dog told them what happened. Maybe they'll show mercy on Smonk and we'll find him another time. They can only hope and pray that he lives. King Size had another mental break and was binging on leftover drugs that he found in the base's stockpiles. It looked like he was almost halfway to kicking his addiction at this point. Another raid attacked the base and were invading immediately. As they were approaching, Joey Tucker was caught outside of the base by himself while hunting. He was surrounded by men and had to think fast to get out of the situation. It looked like they didn't completely notice him and were firing at King Size while he was returning to the base. He cut around to the left while hugging the mountainside and was able to escape back to the base. Instead of entering the newly redesigned funnel, 2 raiders stepped back and used the walls for cover. The others were using trees as cover and another firefight was going on. One of the raiders were taken out, but Joey Tucker was hit directly and taken down. King Size went in and rescued Joey from the gunfire while Hoff and Stompy provided cover fire. Another one was killed and the last 2 raiders retreated. Fravatar prepared to chase down the wounded raider. It didn't take long and Fravatar killed him. Joey Tucker was still being tended to by King Size and he ended up getting a disease. He was sick from gut worms. They realized that the doorway into the funnel wasn't working, so they removed it and they were cutting all the trees down. This would minimize any cover attackers will have in the future. In order to continue their advanced research, Hot Dog finished the construction of a multi-analyzer tool so Stompy would have all the resources necessary to research the most advanced tech. This was a big step for New Raleigh 2.0 and they decided to start researching fabrication. King Size had another mental break from the withdrawal and slaughtered one of the tamed muffalos. He snapped out of it right after though. That evening, he had another mental break and was wandering around in a dazed state. They decided to have the crypt prepared in case something happened to any of the other colonists. They didn't want anyone else to suffer the cruel fate that obviously did. Looking at King Size's health, he's about 70% of the way to completing his withdrawal. Not too much longer now. They finally researched their comms console, which gave them the ability to communicate with space traders and other colonies. They also needed an orbital trade beacon, and they were all set with their comms station. Things were moving along nicely. Their base was continuing to grow and their food supplies were looking decent. On the 10th of April on the second year, they were raided again and they were attacking immediately. The raiding party wasn't too large, but the men got into their positions regardless and prepared for the attack. The first raider was hit by multiple turret shots and fell back immediately. He didn't make it far. The other men closed in and were met with shotguns and rifle fire. 2 more men died and the remaining 2 began to flee. One of the fleeing raiders were slowed down by one last gunshot. Fravatar went in to take her out. He caught up quickly enough and only knocked her out. He decided to capture her and try to recruit her instead of killing her off. Because of a heat wave right before the raiders were defeated, it was time to shut down the heaters and turn back on the air conditioners. They wanted their base to be nice and comfortable. The next night, King Size went catatonic and was completely incapacitated in the dining hall. Hot Dog quickly got out of bed to rescue him and keep him in the med bay to recover. He was getting closer to kicking his addiction, but he needed to rest a little bit longer. That same day, Joey Tucker passed out while working the crops and needed to be rescued. Hot Dog stopped what he was doing to help Joey. It looked like his gut worms were still giving him issues. Hot Dog placed him in the med bay and continued working on growing more food. A couple days later, 3 of the colonists got sick from sensory mechanites. Joey Tucker, Hoff, and Hot Dog. They needed to rest and be tended to so it doesn't do too much damage to them. Fravatar tended them and they were able to get up and keep working. The next day, it looked like King Size was almost completely withdrawn from his addiction. It was a long time and a lot of effort, but it finally paid off and he was no longer addicted to the drugs that he was on before joining the colony. On the 1st of August, their prisoner made an attempt to escape the base. It looks like she was able to secure a weapon from Stompy's room though. While Stompy and King Size were making their way to the prisoner, she snuck into Hot Dog's room and grabbed a rifle. Stompy began fighting her in melee combat so nobody would get shot. He was having issues taking her down though. He slowly backed out of the room while King Size made his way in to continue the fight. They fought for a bit in Hot Dog's room, but King Size was just too strong and eventually took her down. Once she was incapacitated, King Size captured her again and brought her back into her cell. That evening, Hoff finished crafting a chain shotgun. This will really help him out with fending off future raiders. New Raleigh 2.0 was really progressing at this point. Because there were more chain shotguns crafted, Fravatar went ahead and grabbed one too. Stompy was able to research hospital beds, which will really help out in their medbay after raids. The next research was a vitals monitor, which will push their medbay's efficiencies even further. The time came to replace their beds with hospital beds. This process took some time, but the end result was a better medbay for the colonists of New Raleigh 2.0. The next task at hand was making a prison hall that would separate captured prisoners. Right now, having up to 3 prisoners maximum in one room just wasn't cutting it. They carved out 4 separate cells. On the 8th of August, King Size was able to successfully recruit their captive. We'll name our newly recruited colonist Nyron, who requested to be a member of the colony in an earlier episode. The vital monitors were researched and it was time to add them by the hospital beds to make the medbay even better. The next night, a group of wild boars went mad from a psychic wave and began to attack the base. The men were making their way to the entrance to defend it, but they were coming in too quickly. The turrets began to open fire on them as they approached. As the men arrived, they were already by the sandbags and began attacking them. They grouped up and fought them off. It took some time, but they killed them all and took in their corpses for food. Early in the morning on the 12th of August, another refugee was being chased by raiders and asking for safety. Their defenses were solid and they could use another colonist, so they agreed to let her join the colony. Her name was Galvin, and she was a capable fighter and had good social and intellectual skills. She made her way back into the base to grab a weapon and help defend as the raiders arrived to begin their attack. The men began to make their way into the funnel where the turrets and men began to open fire. They were already taking heavy fire with nowhere to go except forward, and they got close enough for the shotguns to begin shooting at them. The men were dropping quickly, but one managed to make it to the front line. He was surrounded and being shot at from every angle. In a mad panic, he fired at Fravatar and was killed immediately after. Another man died at the same time, and the rest decided to flee. 2 of the raiders were wounded as they were making their escape. Fravatar and King Size went after each of them. Fravatar began fighting off the straggler, and King Size made his way up to the other men. They easily finished them both off and allowed the rest to escape. Late into the night of the 14th of August, Stompy managed to win Nyron's love by talking about his own accent. They became lovers at that point. Looking over their base, New Raleigh 2.0 was becoming quite the home for the colonists. They were hoping to continue their growth and maybe even leave this Rimworld one day. With all of this growth, they expanded their food storage space even more. They wanted to have a large stockpile, just in case. That evening, a local gazelle went mad and began attacking Galvin, who was right by it. She tried to flee to the base, but it was able to keep up with her and keep on an aggressive attack. King Size was making his way out to help her, but it was still attacking her aggressively. Right before King Size showed up to help, the turrets took it down. He went ahead and finished it off and took it into the freezer for storage. Galvin was pretty banged up, so she made her way into the med bay. On the 4th of September, a group of cows self-domesticated and joined the colony. This would be a nice addition to the base. The next day, another raid was preparing to attack their base. The raiders made the mistake of funneling into the base one at a time and were taken out immediately. A few more came in and died until the rest of them decided to flee. The next day, another stroke of luck hit their base. A group of Labrador retrievers joined the base too. The poor dog's luck changed very quickly though, as a nearby cougar immediately attacked one of them. The other dogs fled so they wouldn't suffer the same fate. Sadly, one of their new dogs perished right away. The decision was made to begin a mining expedition into the neighboring mountain in hopes of uncovering some components that could be mined and stored in the base. Plans were laid out, and as they began working in the mountain, another cold snap hit the area. It didn't take long and they were already successful in finding some compact machinery. Joey Tucker mined away at it and they added it to their stockpiles. A few days prior, one of the neighboring tribes called the Kin League of Enio offered peace talks to improve their relationships with the Pixel Rookies. They decided it would be worth the journey, so Galvin and Fravatar volunteered to take one of the cows to the nearby meeting site and see what happens. It was not a very far distance to travel, so they began to pack their things and get ready to head out. Fravatar waited for Galvin to show up and they were on their way. While they were gone, another group of raiders attacked the base. They gathered nearby at the south end of the valley and prepared for their invasion. While waiting for the attack, Galvin successfully negotiated peace talks with the other faction and improved their relationship. This was great to hear, and since they were finished with their mission, they made their way back home. About at that time, the raiders began their attack. As soon as they rounded the corner, the men opened fire. The first raider was killed immediately, which caused the other men to panic. Two of them made the mistake of pressing forward to try and engage them. It didn't take long until they were killed too. This caused the remaining raiders to flee from the area. One of the men were badly wounded, so King Size made his way out to finish him off. He was still too quick though, and he managed to outrun King Size. The next day, Galvin and Fravatar returned to the base from their first mission outside of the valley. The next night, the colonists continued to mine out the other mountain in search of valuable minerals. Some good news came to the colony the following night. One of their Labradors, She-Devil, became pregnant. The puppies could be traded or sold as a valuable commodity, or they could just keep them for company in the base. On the 15th of September, a small army of raiders prepared to attack the colony. In the group of raiders, Fravatar's daughter was present. This could complicate things. This might be the biggest raiding party they've had to fight against so far. Everyone lines up into their positions for the impending attack. Tensions are high as the men approach their defensive funnel. They're foolish and go in one at a time in a line, and the first one is taken down immediately. The rest of the men start pouring in, and two more are killed in the heavy gunfire. Every single raider is equipped with melee weapons, and they can't break through the waves of gunfire. Two of them finally make it to Hoff and Stompy and begin attacking them. More of them break through, but it's very short-lived. They begin to flee as more men get gunned down. As they start fleeing, the colonists begin to pick off whoever they can. More are wounded and killed as they successfully defended another raid with almost no issues at all. The men begin to break from their defensive formation. Many of the raiders weren't killed though, so they returned to capture them as prisoners. Unfortunately, it looks like Fravatar's daughter was one of the raiders killed in the firefight. There was nothing they could do for her now. Others went back to capture the rest of the wounded men. It's a good thing they expanded their prison ward because it was already too full of captives from the last fight. One of them was mortally wounded and died that night. The colonists barely felt remorse after the assault they had to endure from them though. Still, the men worked as hard as they could to tend to the others. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. Another raider died later that morning. There are only 4 more remaining. Looking over one of the prisoners, they realized that he was addicted to psychic like King Size was, and they had no need for another member of the colony like that. They decided that he would be a good test subject for King Size to improve his medical skills by performing questionable operations on him. They wanted to send a message to the other factions that New Raleigh 2.0 was now a force to be reckoned with. Fravatar had a mental break and begins insulting whoever he sees. He was having a hard time coping with the loss of his daughter in the last fight. King Size continued with the first operation, but Nyron and Fravatar broke out into a fight. It was quite a sight to behold. Fravatar and Nyron were duking it out, and poor Joey Tucker was vomiting from being ill right beside them. Fravatar took the fight to the extreme and incapacitated Nyron. He seemed to snap out of it afterwards, and he rescued her and laid her in the med bay. This wasn't the colony's best moment. Meanwhile, King Size was finishing up his attempted surgery and failed catastrophically. He immediately left to treat the wounds he just caused so the prisoner can heal up and be worked on again later. While King Size was patching him up, another fuse blows right outside of the base. Stompy runs outside and takes care of it right away though, and everything's fine. Later that night, one of their prisoners goes berserk and tries to escape. King Size hurries over to make sure things don't get out of hand. He opens the door and is jumped by the prisoner. After a quick fight, King Size killed her. They were down to only 3 prisoners now. It was time for King Size to continue working on his subject and try to remove more organs for practice. They were consuming too much electricity and the power kept flickering. This would cause issues for King Size's surgery he was performing. It was another catastrophic failure. Frustrated, he tried one last time, and this time, his mistake was fatal. On the 3rd of December, Nairon got sick from an infection in her wounded arm. She would need to rest up more before she was ready to leave the medbay. That afternoon, another refugee was being attacked. Rumors must be spreading about how New Raleigh 2.0 takes in those who are in need of aid. They agree to take him in and fend off the raiding party. Taking a look at his stats, they're fairly low minus his intellect, but he's decent at a lot of things. He'll be a great addition to the colony. We'll name him Mac after my Discord buddy. The raiding party arrived immediately after and began their attack. The men got back into their defensive positions. King Size and Mac found themselves to be separated from the group. This could be a problem. They didn't want to go like Smonk did previously. As the raiders drew closer, one of them noticed King Size and Mac and separated to try and take him out. Both of them fled towards the mining site for cover. As they were making their way into the mine, the rest of the men began the attack and were taking heavy fire. It looked like one of the raiders had an incendiary launcher, but the colonists were holding strong. Stompy was hit by the explosion of the grenade and began to fall back. He managed to find better cover and continue his defense. Galvin was hit by an explosion too and fell back to safety. Hot Dog made the mistake of passing through the fighting and got hit by an incendiary grenade too. There was a lot of chaos going on in the funnel, but they finally killed off another raider and caused the rest of them to flee. Checking on the others, King Size managed to defend himself and Mac. Everyone seemed fine. Right after the fighting ended, Nairon had a tantrum because of the intense pain she was currently in. The men put out the fires and collected the Molotov cocktails in the incendiary launcher. That could come in handy later on. Fravatar was still struggling with the loss of his daughter and went on a sadistic rage. He took out his anger on one of the prisoners. After a quick scuffle, he snapped out of it and left the prison cell. Since they managed to mine out a large portion of the mountain, they laid out plans to continue looking for compact machinery that could be used to improve their base. They received good news from their comms. An exotic goods trader was passing by. They might be able to purchase some advanced components that'll help with some new technology that they're trying to build in the base. Galvin contacts them and is able to purchase all of their advanced components. With these advanced components, they're able to construct a ground-penetrating scanner that will allow them to drill into the Earth's useful resources. This would be very helpful for continued growth in the colony. Hot Dog begins working on it, and after a few hours, it's completed. Because they're continuing to expand their base, they're using too much electricity, so they decided to build another geothermal generator to provide sufficient electricity to the base. Since this isn't within the base's walls, they need to secure it by building a wall completely around it. On the 8th of December, a volcanic winter hits the valley. Just like the toxic fallout in the first year, they don't know how long this will last for. They do know that they need to fill up their freezer with as much food as they can right away, so they plan a massive hunt in the valley. Joey Tucker was alone hunting a megasloth until it turned on him and retaliated. He knew it was dangerous to fight such a massive creature alone, so he fled to the base looking for backup. The megasloth managed to hit him as he was escaping. Fortunately, he was still able to outrun it. As he got closer to the base, the megasloth took shots from the turrets. This caused it to flee and the colonists grouped up and continued to hunt it down. Fravatar got closer, the megasloth collapsed from his wounds and they were able to kill it. Looking at their newly created mineral scanner, they were able to see which rich deposits were located near their base. While scanning the area, one of the hunted muffalos turned on Fravatar, but it was taken out right away. While finishing the second wall around their new geothermal generator, Nairon successfully recruited one of the remaining 2 prisoners. He was incapable of performing most tasks, but the trade-off was that his combat skills were exceptionally high. We'll name him Jawless Paul, who commented and requested to be part of the series. Welcome aboard, Jawless Paul. We hope your combat skills come in handy. He'll equip the incendiary launcher for now and he'll be the heavy hitter for future raids. Fravatar was still having issues with losing his daughter and began wandering around in a psychotic state. A rare thrumbo was passing through the valley, and because of the volcanic winter, they thought it would be a good idea to group up and hunt it for the extra meat. These animals can be very dangerous, so they had to be careful. They all lined up and opened fire. It didn't take much and it turned towards the group to defend itself. It was too fast. They got one more round of shots and had to immediately fall back into the base. They turned and ran towards their defensive turrets, but it was right behind them. As they crossed the sandbags, it caught up to Joey Tucker and began attacking him. He cowered in fear while it took heavy fire from the rest of the hunting party and the turrets. It was finally taken down. Galvin finished it off and took it to their food storage. They should have plenty of food, even if the volcanic winter lasts multiple seasons. The next upgrade to their base would be a fabrication bench. This will let them craft advanced equipment and weapons that will be helpful to further expand their forces. On the 12th of December, a boom rat went mad and went in to attack Mac. The auto turrets tried to eliminate the threat before it got to him. They missed and Mac tried to make his way back into the base. He had to be careful and not hurt it to the point of exploding beside him. Boom rats were quite volatile and could be very dangerous. He tried to get away from it, but it was too vicious. It incapacitated him and proceeded to head into the base to attack others. Right before it got too close to the turrets, they killed it and the explosion didn't damage anything. Hot Dog went up to tend to the fire while Hoff rescued Mac. That afternoon, two good things happened. The first was that Nyron successfully recruited the last prisoner to New Raleigh 2.0. He was an extremely adept fighter and had really good stats all around. He'll be a great addition to the colony. We'll name him after my good friend, Brandon M. Welcome to the colony, buddy. The second interesting event was that a whole new area was discovered in the valley. While they were mining out the other mountain, they uncovered an entrance into a separate valley in the area. While scouting out this new area, they found lots of ship chunk debris that could be salvaged for parts. The next night, a psychic wave swept over the valley and drove all the squirrels in the area mad. They were all over the place and attacking whoever they saw. Joey Tucker was getting attacked by one in the battery storage area. Hot Dog, who's incapable of violence, was being chased by one and he couldn't escape it. Joey Tucker came in to help him out. He was pretty upset by the whole ordeal and it caused him to have a mental break and hide in his room. Hot Dog was ambushed by another squirrel and fled back inside looking for help. Everyone was panicking and Nyron began to open fire at the squirrel. They didn't want to accidentally shoot anyone in the crossfire, so Jawless Paw stepped in and took care of it. It looked like all the squirrels were dealt with, but a few of the guys were pretty banged up. King Size and Hot Dog went to the med bay to recover. They were still having issues with their power supplies, and upon further inspection, it looked like they forgot to add one final conduit line to the base's connection. This was a rookie mistake and they laid out the plans to fix it quickly. Hot Dog also got an infection in his right leg from the nasty squirrel bites during the previous attack. While looking over their newly researched technology, Fravatar had another mental break and slaughtered the very bull that he took with him on the first mission outside of the valley from before. The time came to take advantage of the nearby mineral spots underground. A deep drill was constructed by the new generator for easy access. There was a mission requested to destroy a nearby outpost and the reward was a bionic eye. This seemed like a great opportunity to send out their new colonists and see what they could do. Unfortunately, I had an issue with some of the recorded footage and 8 days were lost. A few events happened during that time, but I can fill you in on them. The raiding party led by Brandon M included Jawless Paw, Joey Tucker, and Hoff. They surprised the enemy and took them out without any issues and received the bionic eye as a reward. They also rescued and recruited a new colonist that they found from a nearby crashed pod. Her name is Alyssa. The final big event was that Stompy and Nyron got engaged and were making plans for a wedding. It was quite an eventful 8 days and I really wish I didn't have the technical difficulties and lost that footage. But anyways, back to the base. New Raleigh 2.0 was thriving. They were up to a total of 12 colonists and they were continuing to grow. A new group of cows wandered into the area and were already domesticated, so they joined the colony. They moved the mining drill to a new location hoping to find plasteel for building advanced weapons. Mac was working the deep drill and collecting valuable plasteel. They were also preparing a location for the upcoming wedding. Brandon M was becoming the tactical leader of the colony and was using their only sniper rifle as his weapon. They thought it made sense to install the bionic eye that they received as a reward previously for Brandon M to be an even better shooter. He found a spot in the med bay to lay down and King Size began to prep for the surgery. He brought over the bionic eye and began the operation. He finished the surgery and everything seemed to go very smoothly. Brandon M was resting up from the surgery and the newly installed bionic eye would definitely help with future attacks. At some point they realized that burying every fallen raider was too much effort and stopped doing it quite a while ago. All the corpses of the fallen raiders were taking up too much space in their dumping grounds, so they made a new one south of the colony. A herd of boomalopes were found in the newly discovered part of the valley, so they were going to attempt to train a couple of them. The colonists can harvest chem fuel from them, and they can be used strategically during raids since they're highly explosive. They were running out of storage space, so another expansion was being planned deeper into the base. They worked together to quickly mine out the new area. Things were going great at this point. New Raleigh 2.0 was really thriving. That was until they realized they dug too deep into the mountains and awoke something truly sinister. What's going to happen with the colonists of New Raleigh 2.0 now? You could feel the nervousness in the air as everyone scrambled to find a defensive position in the main hallways. They were used to fending off attackers from the outside. They weren't prepared for an attack from the inside, and something was coming for them deep inside the heart of their base. They were mega spiders. They emerged from the hives that burrowed out from the ground and immediately began attacking. They poured through the hallways straight towards the men. They opened fire and tried defending themselves. Even with heavy gunfire, there are too many of them and they were breaking through right into Fravatar. Both hallways filled up with mega spiders and they began attacking Fravatar, Brandon M, and Stompy. They managed to incapacitate a couple of them, but Brandon M and Fravatar could only hold the line for so long. Brandon M was incapacitated and Fravatar was completely surrounded. The backline was under attack now. On the lower hallway, Mac and Hoff were doing what they could to help Stompy. Stompy did everything he could, but the mega spider was too strong and took him down. King Size finally made his way in and engaged in combat using his uranium club. Fravatar held the line much longer than anyone thought he could, but he was finally taken down. Most of the colonists were up close in melee combat at this point, and there were still lots of mega spiders to fend off. The bottom hall was finally cleared. Mac and Hoff started firing down into the other hall to help the rest of the men. Hot Dog tried to sneak around the chaos and began taking the wounded men into the med bay. Even one of their pet bulls got pulled into the fighting. Hoff and Mac both went around the chaos. Mac went in to rescue Fravatar from the fighting. Most of the mega spiders were killed off, but the fighting continued. Hoff was investigating their storage room when more of them came out of a hive in the orbital comms room. He opened fire right away. The mega spider ignored him to go down the hallway and fight the others. Galvin fired some shots at it, but it was too fast. As it rounded the corner and engaged with her, it was met with gunshots from the rest of the colonists who were still standing. As Galvin and Alyssa were finishing it off, Nyron joined Hoff to scout the back of the base and clear out the hives and stop more from coming in. They finally killed the last mega spider. The fighting was done for now. They had to destroy the hives before more emerged and caused more damage. They went through and destroyed all the hives they could find. Now that everything was situated, the base was in complete chaos. The medbay was completely full and there was carnage everywhere. They were trying to tend to everyone's wounds right away. Galvin was in the prison hall and collapsed from her wounds. Jawless Paw went to rescue her. King Size tried to get out of bed and collapsed immediately. Alyssa was doing everything she could to tend to everyone. Nyron ended up getting an infection from her wounds in her right foot. The colonists couldn't catch a break. The following morning, while checking the health of everyone in the medbay, Galvin died from her wounds in her own bed. There wasn't enough space in the medbay and she didn't get the medical assistance she needed. Immediately following this unfortunate event, the cow that helped defend them from attacking the mega spiders died in the hallway too. Galvin died defending her friends in New Raleigh 2.0. She'll definitely be missed. In the meantime, everyone that was still standing was trying to help the rest of the wounded men. Fravatar got an infection from his wounds next. That same morning, Stompy died from his wounds. They did everything they could, but he wasn't able to hold on. Hot Dog took the time to bury Stompy in a sarcophagus that was already prepared. He was worried that a lot more men would be joining him soon. When he finished laying him in his final resting place, he went towards Galvin's room to bury her too. It began raining that afternoon. The weather matched the sad mood the colony was feeling. It almost felt like the valley was mourning New Raleigh 2.0's loss. Joey Tucker couldn't handle everything that happened and he had a mental break. He went into his room to smash things. New Raleigh 2.0 was an absolute mess. There was blood and bug corpses everywhere. Some of the mega spiders weren't even completely killed yet and just laying on the halls dying. Hot Dog was trying his best to repair the damaged rooms. They completely forgot that they had a prisoner captive. Obviously he wasn't being tended to and he had a mental break because of his malnourishment. He was going berserk. He started breaking down the door to his cell. Once he was free, he cornered Mac in one of the unfinished rooms and attacked him. Mac was incapacitated and Alyssa was nearby, so she went to help him out. While she started fighting the prisoner, Joey Tucker made his way over to rescue Mac. As he made his way over, the prisoner was incapacitated. Alyssa left and Joey Tucker decided he wanted to eat quickly before helping poor Mac out. Alyssa turned around and went to recover Mac and bring him into the med bay. Late that night, King Size went berserk from the intense pain he was feeling. Joey Tucker was in one of the cells since the medbay was completely full, and King Size entered the room. He began attacking Joey Tucker while he slept. He tried to get up and escape, but he was knocked out right away. It wasn't enough for King Size though. He wandered into Joey Tucker's room and attacked their pet dog, Hannibal. King Size was already severely wounded, and Hannibal incapacitated him while defending himself. Brandon M was passing by and turned to rescue King Size. He placed him in a spare bed in the med bay and went back to work. The men were still heavily wounded. Hoff and Alyssa continued to tend to them. Fravatar got out of bed and tried to help everyone out. He was still too wounded though, and he collapsed by the dining hall's entrance. Hoff brought him back into the hospital bed so he could recover a little longer. There was still so much chaos going on that nobody noticed a strange sound deep inside their base. Hoff was in so much pain that he was thrown into a murderous rage. He was actually planning on killing Hot Dog. Obviously, they wouldn't allow that to happen, so Jawless Paw made his way over to arrest Hoff and give him time to cool off. As Hoff was leaving the dining hall, Jawless Paw confronted him. Hoff went berserk and began attacking Jawless Paw. While they were duking it out, Alyssa made her way from behind to help subdue Hoff. Together, they took him down. Jawless Paw made his way to the medbay to rest up from the tussle, and Alyssa took Hoff to one of the spare beds they had for their overflow. Most of the bug corpses were cleaned up at this point, but there was still blood and debris all throughout the colony. It was too much for Nyron to take, and she went into a total mental breakdown and was in a catatonic state. Alyssa was tending to Hoff's wounds, and New Raleigh 2.0 suffered another substantial loss. Fravatar died. His wounds were too much for him, and they weren't able to save him. Hot Dog finally rescued their incapacitated prisoner, and they knew he had to be released. They couldn't tend to themselves at this point, let alone a prisoner. That evening, there was still too much chaos for the colonists to notice a strange sound. Mac came to the conclusion that they weren't going to be able to bounce back from this, and he decided he was going to abandon the colony. They needed all hands on deck to recover, and they weren't going to let Mac go so easily. Hoff went to arrest Mac and make sure he stays and helps. As Hoff got closer, he told Mac that he couldn't leave. Mac went berserk at this and he attacked Hoff. Unfortunately for Mac, he was already really banged up and Hoff took him out right away. He went ahead and carried him back to the medbay to recover. As Hot Dog left the prison hall to tend to Brandon M., he discovered what those strange sounds were that they heard earlier that day. There were still hives hidden in their newly dug out storage area. Another mega spider came through the room and pursued Hot Dog. Hot Dog panicked and fled inside the prisoner's room and hid. The mega spider didn't follow him and began patrolling their base. A baby mega spider was in the hallway, so both Joey Tucker and Jawless Paw came in armed and ready. They were going to finish off this infestation once and for all. As Jawless Paw got closer, Joey Tucker decided to engage the baby mega spider. The adult mega spider heard the commotion and entered the hallway. The men opened fire on it and Joey Tucker braced for it to come at him. Joey Tucker was fighting it off while Jawless Paw opened fire with a light machine gun. It took some time and Joey Tucker took a bit of a beating, but the two of them downed the mega spider. They left it lay there for now. The hives were their main priority. They went into the unfinished storage room and there were 2 remaining hives that they didn't notice prior. They were so busy tending to their hurt colonists. Fortunately, it wasn't too bad. They took out one of the hives. They made their way to the final one and destroyed it as well. The infestation was finally finished and the damage was catastrophic. Hot Dog woke up so he could bury Fravatar. He was a strong fighter and held the line long enough for the mega spiders to be taken out. He'll be remembered as a hero in New Raleigh 2.0. Hot Dog laid him in his sarcophagus and looked over their base to assess the damages. Things were a mess. There was blood everywhere, mega spider corpses were still laying in the hall, and bug guts were all over the walls and floors. The next morning, Mac had another mental break and became obsessed with corpses. The combination of his intense pain and seeing his fellow colonists dying was too much for him. He wandered into their crypt and dug out Swarmlord, who was the first casualty in New Raleigh 2.0. During this, Hoff had a mental break and felt a murderous rage again. This time it was towards Nyron. He was going to make his way into the medbay and kill her. They obviously wouldn't allow this, so Jawless Paw went to arrest him. Hoff made it to the medbay before Jawless Paw caught up to him and he was already assaulting Nyron in her hospital bed. Once confronted, Hoff went berserk and attacked Jawless Paw. Brandon M didn't want anything to do with this and left the room. During this fight, Mac was taking Swarmlord's decayed corpse into the prison hall. Hoff was already wounded and Jawless Paw was one of their strongest fighters. He easily knocked Hoff out. He went ahead and put him in one of the hospital beds right after so he could rest up and snap out of it. Mac dropped the corpse on the table and left it. He seemed to snap out of his mental break afterwards. Hot Dog went to put Swarmlord back in his sarcophagus. He was one of the original 3 founders of New Raleigh 2.0 after all. It was only 3 days after the infestation and their base was still a complete mess. 3 other men died and many were still wounded. 3 more days passed and the remaining colonists recovered. The massive mess was finally cleaned. They ended up getting a distress call from another refugee that was under attack. After losing so many men, they thought it would help to have another member join. Her name was Sev. She wasn't a strong fighter by any means, but she had some other good qualities that would help out with New Raleigh 2.0. The men were getting prepared for the incoming raid that followed after her. The first raider used the corner of their funnel as cover and opened fire. Other men began to pour through past the gunfire. One of the raiders made the mistake of getting into shotgun range. He didn't last long after that. Others were trickling in through the gunfire. Another raider fell. One of the men engaged in melee combat with Joey Tucker. The last raider was killed and it caused the remaining men to flee. They were weakened from the infestation, so they decided not to pursue their fleeing raiders. The wounded men went to the medbay to recover. The base was starting to look good again, except a few extremely valuable colonists weren't there anymore. Later that day, there was some good news as romance was in the air. Alyssa did what most women would do when trying to woo over a man. She mentioned her plant growing skills to Hoff and he was smitten. They became lovers that day. The next day, another raid happened. This one was different though. Surveying the area, they spotted 2 lancers that were approaching. They've never encountered enemies like this before and they weren't sure how threatening they would be. They quickly realized that this was a major threat. The men prepared themselves for combat. Jawless Paul took the initiative to lay incendiary fire down before they made it to the funnel. The 2 lancers approached the base. Jawless Paul lined up his first shot at the lancer that moved forward. Both Jawless Paul and the lancer fired at each other. They both missed. He was in a really bad spot. He took cover in the opposite side of the wall while the men began firing at the lancer closest to the funnel. Its range was too far. Only Alyssa could get a shot off with her bolt-action rifle. Hot Dog was wandering outside of the base in the middle of the fight. He was ordered to flee and barely dodged a shot. Alyssa got a few shots in on the lancer. Jawless Paul used this opportunity to get a better angle to open fire again. As he lined up his shot, Alyssa managed to take the first one out. Jawless Paul lined up around the corner to fire at the last lancer. He managed to get a direct hit and dodged another blast from it. He fell back for more cover. He went in for another shot but fell back once again. He didn't want to get hit by this thing. Jawless Paul saw that Hot Dog was repairing the damage from the first lancer and wasn't focused. The lancer hit him directly. This did a lot of damage to him. He had to get out of danger's way. He fell back behind the generator wall and was covered for now. Alyssa closed in since her rifle could match the lancer's range. It was too quick. Alyssa missed her first shot and fell back for more cover. It closed in to fire on the men. As he was returning, the lancer hit Hot Dog and he was severely wounded. Jawless Paul had a shot on it again. He barely missed it. Jawless Paul and Alyssa were both firing at it now. Jawless Paul missed again. He finally landed another hit on it, but it moved out of the damage of the fire right away. It retaliated and landed another hit on Jawless Paul. He got one last shot off at it, and Alyssa managed to land a shot on it too. The lancer missed Jawless Paul and he slowly moved out of its view. He narrowly escaped another shot. Alyssa landed one more hit on it, but this was taking too long and too much damage was already done. All the men broke from their cover and rushed the lancer. They got within range and opened fire on it. It didn't last long after that. Jawless Paul was wounded badly. He made his way to the medbay. He collapsed on his way into the base. Joey Tucker grabbed him and took him to a hospital bed. Hot Dog recovered enough and got out of the medbay as they were bringing Jawless Paul in. Looking over Hot Dog's health, they realized that the lancer shot his right arm completely off. This would severely handicap his productivity in the base. Looking over Jawless Paul, it was worse. He lost his right arm and his left kidney was completely destroyed. He was at the brink of death, but Joey Tucker managed to bandage him up enough that he was okay for now. They had an idea. They could fix the 2 men, but first they needed to make some advanced components. During a party that was thrown, Jawless Paul's wounds got infected. He was already tended to, so they could just hope for the best. Brandon M was working on the advanced components, and they added 2 bionic arms to the work queue. The next morning, Jawless Paul died from his wounds. They just weren't able to save him. King Size took him to the crypt and laid him in the sarcophagus. He died a hero that helped protect New Raleigh 2.0 from the lethal Lancer raid. He'll be missed. It was the same evening that they buried Jawless Paul and a positive turn of events happened. King Size was comforting Nyron after the loss of her fiancée, Stompy, and he used a common tactic men use to flirt with women. He was bragging to her about his own leg hair and it caused Nyron to become aroused, and at that moment, they became lovers. The next day, another heatwave was hitting the valley. They didn't realize that it was already this time of the year, but the scorching sun indicated otherwise. They needed to run the air conditioning units again. A few days later, it was time for Hot Dog to replace his missing arm with a bionic replacement. He laid in the hospital bed and waited for King Size to begin the operation. At this point, King Size was a seasoned medic, but Hot Dog still had some butterflies while waiting. King Size began the operation, sweating as he did, knowing that Hot Dog's life was in his hands. He was using his steady hands to carefully install the bionic arm. The operation only took around an hour and it was a success. King Size went to grab some food. The operation exhausted him and left him famished. While recovering from the anesthesia, they reviewed Hot Dog's health. Everything looked great and his arm was going to be better than ever. Everyone breathed a big sigh of relief. Hoff finished constructing their first sniper rifle. Though it was poor in quality, it would still be valuable because of its superior range. Brandon M was perfectly suited for such a weapon. His bionic eye would make him a very deadly shot. He made his way into the storage area to equip it. Brandon M also had a very high crafting skill, so he'd be able to make more components for their base. They could use these to build better technology. Maybe they would even be able to construct a ship to escape this rim planet they found themselves stuck on. Just then, they received a request from another faction. Bandits were nearby and causing trouble for their caravans. They wanted help with eradicating them, and they were offering a reward of hyperweave and, more importantly, glitterwood medicine. Glitterwood medicine is the best kind of medicine out there. It would be extremely valuable if they could get their hands on it. Looking over their map, their outpost wasn't far from New Raleigh 2.0. They decided to take a strike team to ambush them and take the bandits out. Brandon M. led a team that consisted of Hoff, Joey Tucker, and Alyssa. He was already going to have a chance to test out his new sniper rifle. They packed their supplies into one of their tamed muffalos and they headed out. The base felt very empty with just the 5 remaining colonists staying behind. The mood was tense knowing their comrades were headed towards potential danger. It took almost the entire day of traveling, but they finally arrived at the outpost. It was dark and raining. They could use this to their advantage. The outpost itself was small, and there were only a few men patrolling the outside. The defenses were minimal. They were confident that they could ambush them and take them out. The men took cover by a nearby wall. They hid behind it and Brandon M. lined up the first shot. He steadied his aim and took his time, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. The first shot was a direct hit. The bandit hid behind sandbags for cover and desperately fired back in retaliation. He missed completely. Brandon M. fired again and the raider was killed instantly. 2 more raiders ran out to attack Brandon M. Joey turned and opened fire while the bandit was completely exposed. Brandon M. laid cover fire and forced the other bandit to fall back. The second bandit was killed right away and the rest of them fled the outpost. They were successful and the mission went flawlessly. One of the bandits were retreating right by the men, so they continued to fire at him. Between Joey Tucker's light machine gun and Hoff's shotgun blasts, they incapacitated the bandit. Before capturing their new prisoner, they investigated the outpost. Joey Tucker broke down the door and found a small food supply. They could use these rations for their travels home. They planned their return trip with their new prisoner and scavenged supplies. Back in Raleigh 2.0, they were extending their medbay to have medicine storage right by the hospital beds. Their reward of glitterwood medicine would be very helpful if they find themselves in a bind. Checking on the raiding party, they were about halfway done with their travels. Into the early hours of September the 3rd, a raiding party was preparing to attack outside of their base on the other end of the valley. The men were preparing their defenses, but they heard gunshots in the distance. Upon further inspection, the raiders found one of their tamed boomalopes out in the open and attacked it. When it died, an explosion burst outward around 3 of the raiders, engulfing them in flames. This was a foolish move on their part and slightly wounded their men. Another of the colonist boomalopes were nearby, and they went after it too. The colonists were hoping that they would kill it and cause more damage to the raiding party. It was only incapacitated though, and they ignored it at that point. There was more gunfire though. Not realizing it, Brandon M.'s party returned from their travels right when the raiding party was preparing for their attack. They were caught off guard and left in the open. In a panic, they grouped up in a closed attack formation and began firing back. Hoff's combat shotgun didn't have the same range as the rest of the weapons. He slowly tried to maneuver into a better position so he could get a good angle on them. Shots were coming at them from everywhere. Brandon M. was hit by an incoming bullet. The rest of the party groaned from the landed shot. Joey Tucker opened fire with his light machine gun and took one of the raiders out. Alyssa continued laying suppressing fire with the incendiary launcher while Hoff closed in on the raiders close to them. Brandon M. was taken down while the enemy closed in on Hoff. They were able to kill another raider with a few well-placed shots. Hoff was almost at point-blank range with a raider equipped with a shotgun. They both exchanged blows while more raiders approached them from the south. Alyssa was the next to fall. Hoff finally took another raider out but was severely wounded. Joey Tucker was trying to fend off the rest of the men, but one came around the corner of the mountain with a knife. Joey Tucker engaged in melee combat with the raider. Hoff tried his best to take down the raider firing on Joey Tucker. He finally managed to land a fatal shot on him, but Joey Tucker was taken down at the same time. Now it was Hoff against 3 raiders. Hoff already had significant injuries. He was barely holding on. As the knife-wielding raider got closer to him, Hoff killed him and the rest of the men began to flee. They were safe. For now. He immediately went to rescue his men and others were on their way to help too. It was a disaster. Hoff was taking Brandon M., Hot Dog rescued Alyssa, and Nyron was making her way to help Joey Tucker. They needed to hurry. At the worst possible time, a breaker blew in the base and caused a fire in the hallway. The rest of the colonists who were defending the entrance quickly broke formation and ran inside to put the fire out before it spread too far. Fortunately, they were able to put the flames out before it spread too much. Hoff was too badly injured. He collapsed on his way back to the base. He and Brandon M. both laid there, slowly dying. The men hurried to their aid. An explosion was heard off in the distance. This seemed to trigger an awful chain reaction. Their wounded boomalope finally died. This wasn't a concern of theirs right now. At the same time, both Alyssa and Joey Tucker died from their wounds before making it to the medbay. They hurried to rescue both Hoff and Brandon M. They were moving as fast as they could, but they were too far from the base. Brandon M. died shortly after the others. Mac kept pushing. He was carrying Hoff as fast as he could. It was the worst case scenario. Every single one of the colonists in Brandon M.'s raiding party died. It was a heavy blow to the rest of the colonists. Oddly enough, King Size and Nyron wanted to try and calm everyone's nerves by making their wedding announcement. This massive loss to their colony made them realize it was now or never. They might not have much time left in the valley. Graves were being dug out in the crypt to honor their fallen colonists. While trying to repair the damages inside the base, Mac had a mental break and threw a tantrum. All of their loss was just too hard to bear. Angry and frustrated, he made his way to Brendan M's corpse and started hitting it. He was furious that they went out on the mission to kill the raiders, which consequently ended up being their demise. He came back to his senses shortly after. The next day, Nyron threw a party to celebrate the upcoming marriage and try to boost everyone's spirits. Morale was low in New Raleigh 2.0, and they really needed something positive to take their minds off of all the loss. One of their pet puppies, Murder, somehow got into their stash of alcohol without realizing it. Their puppy developed an addiction to alcohol. It was so drunk that it passed out beside the stockpile of beer in the storage area. This was definitely an unexpected event. They would need to keep an eye on Murder moving forward. The colonists worked on the crypt so they could bury their men. Their prisoner went berserk from the extreme hunger he was feeling. They were short on men and completely forgot that he needed to be tended to. He broke free from his cell and started to escape. Kingsize was making his way over, but the prisoner attacked one of their pet Labradors, Zoppico. The prisoner was already wounded, and Zoppico defended herself and took him down. Kingsize still made his way over to place him back into his cell. The next day, they began burying their lost men. It was another rainy day. It felt like the valley was mourning their losses once again. Hot Dog went to get Brandon M. He was a strong fighter. It was a real shame they were ambushed as they made their way back into the valley. Finally, they buried Joey Tucker. All 4 of the colonists were laid to rest, and they were only down to 5 colonists total now. Looking over Nyron, her mood was still quite low despite just getting some lovin'. She was still suffering from the loss of her first fiancé, Stompy, who only died about 19 days earlier. Later that day, a transport pod crash-landed nearby and it contained Nyron's father in it. Nyron immediately went to rescue him so they could recruit him into the colony. She brought him into a neighboring cell to recover, and then they could recruit him into their base. On the 8th of September, her father went berserk from the intense pain he was feeling. He began to break out of his cell. In a fit of rage, he broke into the other prisoner's cell and began attacking him. Her father was already wounded though, and after a long fight with the other prisoner, he was knocked out. Kingsize placed him back into his bed and treated his wounds. The next day, the other prisoner went berserk too. They weren't having much luck with recruiting either one of them. Kingsize made his way into the cell and confronted the prisoner. It didn't take much for Kingsize to take him out. Once he was knocked down, Kingsize placed him back into his bed to recover. The decision was made to release their prisoner and let them fend for themselves outside of the safety of New Raleigh 2.0. Sev escorted the prisoner to the exit and he made his way out of the valley. That evening, another transport pod crashed nearby with a wounded survivor. Hot Dog made his way out to capture her so they could heal her up and try to recruit her to join the colony. As soon as Hot Dog laid her in her bed, they realized her wounds were too critical. Kingsize woke up so he could tend to her right away, but there wasn't enough time. Sooner than she arrived, she was already dead. Kingsize dropped the medicine he was carrying, and in disgust, he took her corpse outside of their base. The excessive death recently was weighing heavily on the entire colony. At noon on the 11th of September, a large piece of an ancient spaceship fell from the sky and crashed into the valley right outside of New Raleigh 2.0. Nyron was transporting slag metal into the base when it landed nearby. They knew this thing was dangerous. They could just feel its presence and it was releasing poison around where it landed. They needed to gather what little strength they had left and destroy it. The men went into their defensive formation while Nyron approached the wreckage to investigate. She equipped the sniper rifle. She didn't want to get close to this thing. She took cover behind the rock by their base and took aim. It was hard to concentrate. There was a lot on her mind. She missed her first shot completely. She landed her second shot. A giant mechanoid centipede crawled out from the wreckage and approached Nyron. She fled back to the defensive funnel. They wanted to have an advantage fighting something like this. They realized it wasn't pursuing her. The centipede was going to protect its ship wreckage. Nyron had the range advantage, so she went back out to try and lure it to the base again. She lined up her shot. She missed again. And again. And again. She finally landed the fourth shot and it provoked the massive creature. She saw it taking aim and fell back. She forced herself to be calm as the centipede rained deadly projectiles down on her. She needed to be careful. The shot barely missed this time. She fell back for better cover as it opened fire once again. She made one last attempt at getting it to follow her, but it wouldn't leave its ship wreckage. Unfortunately, it wasn't playing by their rules. They knew what had to be done. They grouped up and made their way towards the ship. Mac would lay incendiary fire down for cover. He made his way into position. The centipede approached him, so he fell back. Nyron got into position instead. She did have the best firing range out of everyone. She landed a shot on it. Mac got back into position to create cover fire. Sev and Kingsize made their way towards the surrounding tree line for additional cover within firing range. Sev was hit by the crossfire on her way there. They all lined up and unleashed hell on their unwelcome guest. Things looked like they were going well as they kept landing hits and avoiding more damage. Its next burst of fire hit both Mac and Nyron, but luckily they survived. They continued to try and take this thing down. it began to focus its attention on Sev and King Size. The next barrage of fire landed a headshot on Sev. Sev was in major trouble. The shot to her head was a serious blow. Another burst of bullets did enough damage to Sev to take her down. Hot Dog began making his way up to rescue Sev from the fighting. Finally, after a 6-hour skirmish, the centipede mechanoid was killed. The stress of the fighting was too much for King Size. As soon as he realized it was over, he had a mental break and went to binge some of the drugs they've stored up from raids to sell to traveling merchants. Mac and Nyron approached the ship remains and began to open fire on it. Hot Dog arrived to rescue Sev. At this rate, it was going to take a long time to destroy the wreckage. They thought it would be best to heal up and then deal with it since the threat was already taken out. The glitterwood medicine was already coming in handy. Nyron was wounded pretty badly, but the medicine worked wonders on her. After Mac finished patching her up, he got into the neighboring bed to continue resting up. That evening, Mac recovered and took the light machine gun out to finally dispose of the poisonous ship wreckage. One final round of shots finished the job. All that was left was some scrap metal, steel, plasteel, and advanced components. At this point in the game, I had a corrupted video and I lost 6 days worth of footage, so I'll fill you in on the events that happened during that time. A raid attacked New Raleigh 2.0 and they used a mortar to rain hellfire down on the base. The men had to go out and take the fight to them because of this, and the end result was both King Size and Sev getting captured. Fortunately, they had a ransom to buy King Size back and they accepted the offer. Because of this though, they lost Sev but had a new mortar within their walls for long-range defense. Morale was low though. They had too much space and wealth to manage for only 4 colonists. Nyron was just happy that her love was brought back to the base in one piece. Still though, they tried the best they could do to maintain their home, hoping they'd find new members to join New Raleigh 2.0. In addition to taking a mortar from the previous raid, they also found some high explosive shells left over from the attack. These would be helpful for their defense since they were spread so thin now. Hot Dog made his way over to gather up everything left over. On the 6th of December, they were lucky enough to have a crashed transport pod land nearby. Nyron captured the wounded survivor and they were hoping to recruit her to the base. Looking over the new captive, they had low combat skills but a lot of potential to be a very valuable colonist. The following evening, another group of raiders invaded New Raleigh 2.0. They were attacking immediately. Luckily, it was only 3 men. They lost most of their ranged fighters already, and even though King Size preferred melee weapons, he was their best shooter at the moment. Nyron was sick and Mac was currently experiencing a mental break. King Size was their only defender minus their auto turrets they had set up at the base of the funnel. One of the raiders got too close and got blown away by the turret fire. They didn't account for the other 2 men sitting outside of the turret's range though. This would be trouble if they didn't take care of it soon. King Size made his way to the front line and Hot Dog repaired the damaged turrets. King Size was really struggling to get any hits on the raiders. He moved up further to get a better shot. Nyron was trying to make her way over, but she was so sick that she could barely even walk. She was ordered to drop her sniper rifle and Mac was going to back King Size up now that he was recovered from his mental break. While this was going on, the turrets were damaged enough to cause a chain reaction explosion. All their defenses were gone. King Size still held the line while waiting for backup to arrive. The firefighting continued. No one was able to land a hit. As Mac got closer, a bullet finally hit King Size. Wounded, he still held the line while Mac lined up and started firing at the enemy raiders too. They just weren't able to land any hits. Finally, King Size was hit by another stray bullet. This took him down. It was just Mac defending the base now. All of a sudden, they were given a choice. A distress call came in and someone was being chased by more raiders. If they took them in, they'd have another able-bodied man that could help them secure the base and begin recovering from the damages of the raiders, or they could ignore them and hope that Mac can take the men out. It was a hard choice, but they decided to offer them safety and hope that they can help fend off this threat and defend them from the next impending raid following him. His name was Jess. He had high melee combat skills. This was good. He entered the valley and could hear the gunshots as he was approaching the base. He was going to try and ambush the raiders closest to where he was coming from and catch him off guard. It was complete chaos. Mac fell back and they started to enter the funnel. The other raider saw the new colonist approaching and opened fire on him. He had to take cover. The next group of raiders were coming. All the while, Hot Dog was sneaking past the gunfire to rescue King Size and start tending to his wounds. Just knew it was now or never and made his way into the fray. He got in his face and started fighting him barehanded. Hot Dog almost made it to the safety of the base, but got hit by a bullet right before passing the sandbags. Nyron was slowly making her way to back them up. They continued fighting, but other raiders began to pour through. They made a mistake allowing the new colonist in. It was just too much. Jess took out the second raider, and the third one fled. Unfortunately, more men were already at their door. They outran Jess and began beating him down. He was already taken down as Mac missed another shot. More men came around the corner as they approached Mac. He was taken down right away. They approached Nyron and beat her down as well. Their pet Labrador, She-Devil, tried to protect Hot Dog, but there were too many men. He was taken out immediately as well. As the raiders killed She-Devil, a mysterious man in black entered the valley looking to help the colonists in their most dire time of need. Carrying food in one hand and a revolver in the other, he approached New Raleigh 2.0. The raiders decided to capture Jess, Nyron, and Mac and flee the valley. They didn't know that they were passing this mysterious man named Leon on their way out. He opened fire as they passed by him. The first raider thought he was in the clear until Leon landed a headshot and severely wounded him. He landed another shot. He took chase after the men and kept firing while keeping his pursuit. They were getting close to the exit of their valley. He needed to hurry. The raider began crossing a pond and a clearing. This was his chance. The next shot killed him and Mac was temporarily freed. Leon fired across the pond and hit the other raider carrying Nyron. Mac was wounded badly, but he managed to get up and hobble his way back to the base. Leon slowed the front raider down after a few shots and made his way closer to the men. He attacked the raider from behind and killed him. As the other raider passed by him, Leon gunned him down. The last raider tried to go back for Nyron and was killed too. Leon single-handedly saved New Raleigh 2.0 from its complete demise. Mac slowly made his way back into the base. He noticed that the raiders set fire to their wedding spot before they left, but this was the least of their concerns right now. Hot Dog got an infection from his wounds. Both Hot Dog and King Size were in pretty bad shape. They needed treatment soon. Leon took the new recruit with him since he was in worse shape than Nyron and hurried back to the base to help treat the wounded. Checking on the others, they noticed King Size almost completely bled out and needed help now. Leon got closer and laid Jess on the ground. He needed to try and save King Size. He grabbed the medicine and started working on him. Leon was so close but was too late. King Size died while he was being tended to by Leon. The other wounded men slowly made their way into the med bay. Nyron was stable enough to get up and walk on her own. This allowed Leon to work on patching up everyone else. He tended to Hot Dog first. He was stable, so he started tending to Jess, and at the worst possible time, they were being raided by another group of men. It was a large raiding party, but fortunately they were preparing for their assault, which meant Leon could tend to everyone first. Exhaustion was starting to really set in. Nyron didn't have time to rest. She made her way to their newly acquired mortar with the intention to obliterate the raiders before they began their assault. The first shot was close, but not close enough. She reloaded and took aim again. The shell soared through the valley, but it was way off her target this time. She lined up the third shot. It flew just beyond the raiders and exploded in the sandbags. She ran out of time. She readied her final shot while the men began their assault. She missed for the fourth time. She prepared herself for the attack as Leon came to back her up. The raiders got close and the fighting began. The melee fighter was approaching Nyron, so she fell back further to find better cover. He followed close behind her. The raiders were getting better angles on Leon and he took a few shots. The raider began fighting Nyron and more men were coming. They were overwhelming Leon and Nyron. They both tried to fall back to the sandbags. Nyron didn't make it. She was taken down and Leon got his revenge by killing her attacker right after. Another raider got right into Leon's face and they were firing at each other at point-blank range. There were just too many men. Leon was taken down and everyone was incapacitated. There was nothing they could do. The raiders decided it was time to take what prisoners they could find and leave. As they were heading out, they attacked one of the colonists' pet muffalos. They didn't kill it though, they just wanted to send a message. They left with Leon and Nyron. Their fates were up to the raiders now. The two raiders in the north wall of the base mined their way through their defenses and left as well. Hot Dog and Jess were still wounded, but they were able to get up and move around. Jess began patching Mac up too. They were too weak to try and pursue the fleeing enemies. Before they even left the valley, Leon died from his wounds. He was with New Raleigh 2.0 for a very brief amount of time, but he saved the colony and died in the process. They'll never forget the mysterious stranger in black. Later that day, Hot Dog took King Size out to be buried in the crypt. He was a strong fighter and a good friend. He deserved to rest with the other fallen men. Nyron never had the chance to say goodbye to her lover before she was taken away. It was just Hot Dog, Mac, and Jess now. That evening, the men were still recovering from the previous raid and they received a message regarding peace talks with another faction. It was something they needed to consider given the current state of New Raleigh 2.0. In the middle of the night, Nyron's father went berserk. He was starving to death. The colony was in so much disarray that they couldn't take care of their prisoners. Everything was in chaos. In a starving rage, he attacked one of their pet Labradors. The pet retaliated in defense. The prisoner was so weak, it didn't take much to incapacitate him. He was down before Jess could even make his way over to him. Jess didn't feel mercy for the prisoner. He was cold-hearted and he knew the prisoner was already on borrowed time. He stripped him of his clothes and he left him there to die. The next morning, their prisoner died in the storage room. The other captured prisoner from the transport pod crash was in really bad shape too. Just a few hours later, they also died from their injuries. Jess also had a mental break and began wandering their base in a daze. Early in the morning, a large group of raiders appeared at the valley. The colonists weren't strong enough to deal with such threats. Mac was still recovering and Jess was wandering in a daze. Hot Dog was incapable of violence, which meant they had to rely on their turrets for defense. The first raider approached the entrance and was greeted by a barrage of bullets. She relentlessly pressed towards the turrets. As she got beside him, another burst of shots flew at her and she was killed, but more men approached. The raider in the back took multiple shots in the head and was severely wounded. Not even realizing it, Jess was attacked and knocked out. The men breached the turret's line of fire and began breaking them down. While checking on Jess, the raiders did critical damage to the turrets. They tried to fall back, but the explosion killed both men and caused the rest of them to flee. They forgot that the previous raiders penetrated the defensive wall and left an opening. Fortunately, most of the raiders attacked head-on and Jess was only wounded. Hot Dog went to rescue him. Jess was recovering, but their base was still in complete disarray. There was blood and vomit all through the halls. Earlier that day, Hot Dog prepared another sarcophagus. Having to prepare yet another one weighed heavily on Hot Dog. Losing friends like this was taking its toll on him. His time with New Raleigh 2.0 was brief, but Leon saved the colonists from their demise. He'd be buried in the crypt with the rest of the men. Hot Dog laid him down and sealed the sarcophagus shut. The following night, Hot Dog continued to repair the defensive turrets. Early the next morning, Jess got sick from malaria. The men knew they were vulnerable and decided it would be worth meeting with the other faction and discuss talks of peace. Mac was their best person for the job and he volunteered to take a muffalo and meet with the opposing faction. He took supplies with them in case he had opportunities to trade some goods. He plotted his route on the map and prepared to leave. That night, Mac set off with their muffalo to convince the other faction to stop raiding their base. A few hours later, they received a request to help a wounded colonist that was stranded somewhere outside of the valley. Looking over the map, they saw that she was nearby the location that Mac was heading towards for their peace talks. He might be able to rescue a new member of the colony on his way back. The next morning, Hot Dog was visiting Galvin's tomb while nervously waiting to hear back from Mac. The grief of losing so many loyal friends tormented him. Not long after, they received a message from Mac. The meeting went poorly. In fact, it made the relationship worse. Mac did everything he could and they knew it was risky to go out there in the first place. The incapacitated refugee was nearby. He made a short detour to rescue her. It only took a couple of hours and he arrived. There were crazed, man-hunting animals in the area though. She was downed and surrounded by a group of bloodthirsty squirrels. Mac realized he didn't have a weapon equipped, so he got a pump-action shotgun out of the load of his tradable goods. He went over and equipped the shotgun. The crazed squirrels were already making their way towards Mac. He used a nearby tree for cover and took aim. His first shot missed. They were too fast. He fired off a second shot but missed again. He was being swarmed by the violent rodents. He tried fending them off, but he was completely surrounded. He was being overwhelmed and they weren't letting up. He tried calling for help as the squirrels tore at his flesh, but no one was around to hear him. Mac was taken down by the murderous squirrels and the caravan was lost. They lost all contact with Mac and prayed that they didn't finish him off. It was just Hot Dog and Jess now. They noticed that they received another message though. It was a prisoner that was able to sneak a distress signal to them with her location. She was close by. Jess grabbed the sniper rifle and Hot Dog disassembled their defensive turrets. The desperation was really setting in at this point. They had to try and rescue her. After disassembling 2 of the turrets, Hot Dog proceeded to do the same with 2 of their batteries. Hot Dog was incapable of violence, but he had an idea. The men prepared to leave the base and head towards the prison together. They brought plenty of food with them and confirmed their destination. They left the valley at midnight. They traveled almost an entire day straight until they finally arrived at their destination. They surveyed the area. It was a small outpost and it was lightly guarded. Hot Dog used the darkness to his advantage and began unloading his turrets. He was planning to set it up outside of the base where they wouldn't be noticed and lure the men into a trap. Hot Dog set up a pillar so they could roof off the batteries and power the turrets. It took all night to set up, but everything was almost in place. They received a notification that raiders were approaching their base. They couldn't do anything about it right now though. The men finished installing their attack post. Checking on their base, their only defensive turrets were being destroyed. Not even realizing it, the enemies were fleeing their outpost. It turns out that they spotted Hot Dog and Jess, but one of the men were incapacitated when he approached them and the other one fled. Hot Dog's plan was a success. Jess tried to take out the other raider, but they were too quick. The raid back at their base was still going on though. The remaining raiders killed their pet Labrador puppies and set fire to the base. At least they were able to free the prisoner and she joined the 2 men. Jess continued to search the other buildings while their new colonist Bertha and Hot Dog packed up their small outpost. Checking back on their base, the raiders were attacking the remaining Labradors and incapacitated one. The other one was defending itself from the violent attacker. It was able to kill off the attacker, which caused the rest of them to flee. There wasn't much else in the enemy outpost other than some clothing they had stored up. It was a small success, but the way everything else was going, this was a big morale boost that they really needed. After their victory, small as it may have been, Bertha joined the other 2 men and returned back to New Raleigh 2.0. It was a gloomy afternoon when they arrived and they saw the leftover chaos from the raid. Bertha went to grab medicine and help take care of the wounded Labrador pet. Hot Dog dropped off the supplies while Jess began clearing the mess up in the hallway. Hot Dog started preparing meals for the colonists to eat. That night marked the 4th year anniversary that Hot Dog crash landed on this rim planet with Tao and Swarmlord. He's gone through a lot during those 4 years, and they're at their lowest lows since he's arrived. He woke up early that morning and continued to prepare meals for the others. Hot Dog was lost deep in his thoughts as he finished preparing meals and had his breakfast. He continued to cook while the others still slept. He thought about how he started in this valley with almost nothing and how far they've come and the people he met, befriended, and lost in New Raleigh 2.0. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew if he stayed in the base with these 2 new colonists that he barely knew, they'd continue to be raided and he would either die or be captured like all of his friends did. He went to his room for a brief period of time and packed a small bag of belongings, and he told the others he was going for a walk. He walked out of the base and continued walking. He never looked back. Before he knew it, he was completely gone from the valley. Hot Dog hoped that he would find a quiet place where he could spend some time in peace, or maybe he'd find another colony and help him build a spaceship to return home one day. All he knew for certain was that he could never return to the valley. There was too much loss for him there. That night, he thought about the other colonists, his friends, and thought how one day it would be nice to be reunited with them again. And for a few brief moments, Hot Dog felt peace.
Help me. Please, help me.
What the? You're covered in blood. What happened? Are you okay?
There's not much time left. They're coming for me, and the rest of them are gonna destroy my home. Please, please help us.